brings out many stories to the public that many people have not yet heard, such as the wartime imprisonment by the United States government of ethnic Japanese who lived in Alaska. Also, the Aleut and Pribilof Islanders who resided mostly on islands off the coast of Alaska. The testimonies by these victims, in addition to stories by persons of Japanese ancestry who were kidnapped and brought here to be imprisoned from South America, primarily from Peru. They were presented also at hearings of the Commission, and the Commission collection has all of the transcripts of these testimonies in the National Archives, and they'll soon be available here once we get the Herzig collection in order. There's another group of victims negatively affected by the government's exclusion program, and it's the name of the group is called, euphemistically, voluntary evacuees. There was nothing voluntary about being forced out of your home, kicked out of your home. These Nikkei had chosen to move away from from the restricted military zone, number 1, on the West Coast, in order to avoid having to be imprisoned. The book also includes reports of 2 meetings, not hearings, but meetings of behavioral scientists and another one of legal experts. And the discussion contains observations and comments by these specialists about the wartime forced removal and incarceration of the West Coast Nikkei, which there was serious misinterpretations or outright distortion of information that was gleaned from these magic cables, including the one that was claimed by the National Security Agency employee. It's not possible to get into the details of this subject, but it is an important topic because those who viewed Japanese Americans as untrustworthy and therefore disloyal to America and dangerous to national security used this type of unanalyzed raw data to press for the removal of Nikkei from the Pacific coastal states. More recently, a proposal called The Power of Words, introduced by educator Mako Nakagawa of Seattle, was approved and adopted as a resolution by the JACL National Convention in Chicago a couple of years ago. It is anticipated, hopefully, that implementation of the resolution will help to overcome the widely used euphemistic words that conceal the real story of the wartime concentration camps. I'm going to touch on a few examples of the terms that are not applied accurately, and they are familiar to many who have studied the history of the camps or were directly affected by the wartime events. These words include evacuation, non-aliens, internees or internment camps, and relocation centers versus the concentration camps. It's incumbent upon us to understand that the United States law specifically states American citizens cannot be interned. Internees are aliens who are nationals of enemy countries. They can be imprisoned legally in internment camps. Therefore, Nisei or Sansei, who call themselves internees, are classifying themselves in legal terms as aliens, another term, of course, cooked up by the government, which I mentioned before, that obscures the truth, is the voluntary evacuee. It represents a totally skewed view of the real picture. The same way that the nomenclature non-aliens was used to identify Nisei and Sansei American citizens.
By the way, if you look at one of the preface pages, you'll see Aiko in one of her most provocative moments where she, I believe she was arrested, huh? Because of, yes, indeed, yes. You were sitting next to someone who was arrested. But this kind of, I won't need to reiterate, but I'll just read what we've already done and composed. Aiko Herzig-Yoshinaga did not set out to make history. She was convinced there was an injustice and set out to do what she considered to correct, regardless of the cost in time, energy, or finances. Decades and decades and decades and decades later, thanks to Aiko and her husband, Jack Herzig, the Japanese-American community received some measure of redress, gained additional truth about the wartime incarceration and the abrogation of constitutional guarantees. And important constitutional guarantees were reaffirmed and upheld. While not trained as professional lawyers or historians, Aiko and Jack undertook research, analysis, and advocacy with critical and amazing success that benefited the Japanese-American redress movement. But as I wanted to read to you some of the voices representing the South Bay area, if you don't mind. And of course, the transcripts themselves are in the back. You'll see the 3-ring binders next to where I'll be sitting to sell more books and answer more questions. But I want to share with you about a gentleman named Charles Hamasaki. He testified that he was an 18-year-old fisherman living in Terminal Island and just graduated from San Pedro High School when the FBI, despite his American citizenship, arrested him as a suspected enemy alien because he was a fisherman. You gotta watch those fishermen. So he was confined with other aliens seized by the FBI at the immigration station on Terminal Island. He and others boarded a train under armed guard for 4 days. Mr. Hamasaki recalled traveling through Fresno, Stockton, Sacramento, Redding, Portland, Tacoma, Seattle, Spokane, Montana, and finally ordered to get off at Fort Lincoln in Bismarck, North Dakota. Upon arrival at Fort Lincoln, the temperature was 25 degrees below zero. They were forced to stand outdoors for a physical count and did everything thereafter while in confinement. Want to know more? Read the transcript. Maury Tomac, a veteran psychotherapist with the Kaiser Permanente Hospital. He testified he was not a World War II veteran, but a very, very close friend of one. And as a personal friend and also as a licensed professional, he came forward to speak and to testify at the 1981 government and presidential appointed commission to give testimony. He told the story of a close childhood friend, Shiro Matsumoto, who at 14 was sent to Manzanar WRA camp. The two continued to correspond, and when Mr. Matsumoto returned to his home, they resumed their friendship. However, Mr. Tomac noticed that his friend was becoming increasingly troubled with issues of commitment and being Japanese. After attending one semester at Washington State College, Mr. Matsumoto withdrew, stating that he couldn't make a go of it, and became a migrant farmer working and picking grapes. Mr. Tomac last saw his friend in 1961, who was still struggling to find himself, and several days later received a letter from Mr. Matsumoto's sister informing him that her brother had committed suicide. Mr. Tomac believed professionally and personally that his friend was essentially a casualty of the war. And I must say that while there are not that many stories on the South Bay experience, one thing that I learned while reading through the many transcripts was there are many more who did not come forward to speak at the 1981 hearings, because it was just a life-changing time that many people still were not comfortable to speak about. Still not comfortable. And today, I recognize and respect the fact that there are probably many friends, family of yours that you may know, who did not become part of the 769 witnesses who spoke up. Actually, there are still more who did give testimony in writing, and we do not have record of that in this book. But once the completion of the Herzig collection is completed, then we will be able to have a more complete list of those who did submit testimony in writing. However, beyond that, we know that there are still thousands more who could give testimony, but perhaps are no longer here, or perhaps are still working through the pain of something that's unspeakable for them. And for those, that's why this book gives a composite, a profile of many of you who may feel the same thing, or many of your relatives who may have felt the same thing, many of your friends who felt the same thing but did not themselves. So in their honor, we hope that this book somehow has part of their voice, even though it doesn't have their name.